Приветствую. Спасибо, что пришли послушать как оффлайн, так и онлайн.
Okay, thank you for coming to listen, both online and offline. I'm Sarkis, I'm from cybersecurity, and I'm responsible for safe infrastructure at Ozone. And today I want to talk about identity-aware proxy, what it is, and why it could help a meaningful step towards zero trust.
Немного по адженде. Вначале как раз вводная, как мы к этому пришли.
A few words about the agenda. First, how we came to think about it. Then we'll talk about the proposed solution, compare the risks between IAP and VPN, how to implement, and conclusion.
Собственно, с какой проблемой мы столкнулись у себя в компании?
Here's the problem that we came across in our company.
Не только мы у себя в компании с ней столкнулись,
And not just us.
и удаленная работа в принципе.
VPN and working remotely became in much demand because COVID happened and lockdowns happened.
Компаниям необходимо было как-то выживать.
Companies had to find ways to survive, and the attitude towards remote work has changed substantially. And even companies who traditionally never used VPN and the option of working remotely started offering this option even outside IT. The growth of demand grew to higher demands among hackers, and the scale of vulnerabilities related to VPN grew substantially. We in our company came across this as well. The company is growing, the number of employees is growing, the transition to remote work has happened, and not just our internal employees, but also outsourcers, outstaffers, contractors asked access to companies' systems remotely. We did provide that for VPN on a limited basis, but still. And then I will talk about something that is quite straightforward for many, but still for us to be on the same page. Why VPN is a challenge. The more users have access to VPN, the broader the perimeter, the larger the attack surface, and the higher the probability for attackers to find a way into the system and move about the system. And more systems there are, and the probability of system compromise grows. A very straightforward example that everyone would understand: say an employee wants to play a game and they downloaded it from a torrent website. The file had a Trojan, and the hackers got access to his system through that Trojan. They got access to the system, they started exploring the system. The obvious target would be the domain. And they would try to escalate privileges and to gain access to a broader segment of network that they had initially, a classical story. Before I move to the solution, as security, what have we tried? Well, we tried to decline requests and see what happens, and we tried to do that for a while, but then the business came to us and said, no, we need those outsourcers and contractors. We tried to be as strict as we could. We tried to be very granular about network access, about roles and systems. We also, at that time, we used a VPN agent, a VPN provider with device compliance. We also tried to do some legal paperwork to reduce the number of people who wanted to get access. But this doesn't quite work, because the main issue that I mentioned, the ability for the hackers to move about the network, none of that is addressed by those solutions. And it's important
двигаться в сторону этого решения, начать
Before we move towards the solution that I'm about to discuss, to look at the VPN itself. VPN is a crucial system for a company, and there will still be a broad number of employees that would need access to VPN. So if you don't have MFA on your VPN, you're welcome to drop everything, to stop listening to that presentation, and to run and implement it.
Требованием, наверное, является SSO, да, single sign-on решение.
Another important requirement is an SSO, a single sign-on solution. And if you don't have it, you should think about it, because it would make your life as a security people more easy. Ideally, you want to integrate your SSO with VPN. When we started thinking of what we could do to stop giving away access, but still people could do their job, the solution was obvious and straightforward: to give access to particular applications rather than a VPN. So when we have a contractor, designer who designs images for our company, they only need access to Jira. So why do we need to give them legitimate access to the backdoor of our system, where we can just give them access to Jira?
Конкретному приложению без доступа к сети. Собственно, тогда мы поняли, что это действительно то самое решение, которое поможет нам.
And we saw that that was a good solution that would eliminate access to our broader network, and we could use a proxy that would simply give access to the necessary apps for the necessary employees, and only provide access through port 443 and only through HTTPS protocol. And importantly, we thought that it's not comfortable for us to open up Jira for the wide world, because it has a lot of vulnerabilities and people could try and look and explore it. So idea was not to give access to the application, its resources, before a user authenticates. And through that, we will get granular access to each application.
Замечательно. Собственно, тут на сцену, перед тем, как перейти, кратко опять несчастный сценарий с горизонтальным перемещением. У нас есть сеть компаний, есть, скажем, какой-то...
Okay, and back to the scenario of horizontal movement around network. There's a group of companies who has legitimate access to 1C accounting app, and they don't have access to some secure network. So if a hacker were able to hack the employee's computer, they could try and elevate their privileges. But with IAP, which is identity over proxy, the arrangement is a bit different. The employee would get access to a proxy using HTTPS protocol, and they don't have access to the network. It's the IP, the IAP that has access to the network, and the user only works in the HTTPS interface. So this identity aware proxy is a smart proxy that has a user identity or a device identity. When we essentially ask to provide credentials right at the entry point, and only then we make a decision. The IAP also understands the context of the request. And not only can you gather information from network packets, the IP address, for example, but you can also add JavaScript fingerprinting that would provide more detailed information for each request that the user makes to the proxy. Here's how it works. IAP integrates with your SSL solution and provides authentication, authorization, application of access policies, which are context-based. And it's up to you to choose the architecture. Some solutions help apply policies on a proxy, or if you have all of that already available, you could use SSO plus IDM. And finally, a decision is made whether to grant access or to deny access. Let me present this in a schematic format. We have a user, we have the IAP solution, and the user asks, OK, give me access to this Jira. The request is submitted to SSO. The SSO sends back the logon page. The user types in their credentials. The SSO provides an authentication response with cookies, provides or doesn't provide. Then the user sends a request to the app. The app checks the request and the cookies, and if it's OK according to the policies, only then the request is submitted to the app. Before that moment, the user doesn't have any access to the app's resources. Okay, so let's discuss the benefits. We have discussed them. No access to the company network. We only provide access to a particular app. Access to an app's resources is not provided. No debugging, nothing. If you try to go to jira.com/API, etc., you will be redirected back to the SSO page. You can implement more flexible policies on the IAP itself, and the IAP identity of a proxy, is intended to implement dynamic access policies, not just based on the information and credentials that you provide, but also based on the context. It can make decisions that this user can have access to web controls, and this user shouldn't, based on their position, for example. Because this is a proxy, we can get the best, very rich logs to provide high-level monitoring. And many IAP solutions support not just HTTP, but also gRPC and TCP over HTTP. Unlike VPN, because it's a proxy, it requires a minimum amount of resources, and it can maintain higher loads than out-of-the-box VPN solutions, especially on the less expensive range, and it's much more scalable than VPN. Okay, and let's look at what IAP helps us to do using our smartphone. Say there's a user, they have a corporate computer, they have a smartphone, and they have access to some apps such as corporate email and GitHub. And say access to them is allowed from a laptop. Now to GitHub, they will not be allowed to access from their phone because they can commit to the wrong thread and break the code. So what does Zero Trust has to do with all of this? Well, very simple. IAP helps implement a more granular access, which is the dream of a security specialist, to have the least privilege.
И он удовлетворяет принципу «никогда не доверяя, всегда».
And it satisfies the principle
Одному из принципов
never trust, always verify, which is one of the principles of zero trust architecture.
Identity over proxy также является основой
Identity over proxy is
реализации Zero Trust подходов.
also the
Google в их
base of many implementations of zero trust approach. Even Google uses an implementation of that. It's called differently, it's called Google Front-End Proxy, but it does exactly the same thing.
минимизации
By
сети через VPN делаете шаг.
reducing access to a network through VPN, you take a step sideways that would help you to move towards zero trust if you haven't started yet. What are the most interesting solutions? The
Ссылки будут в конце презентации.
best are the open source solutions. One is Pomerium, the other one is Teleport.
На самом деле это решение, которое было
Pomerium was
разработано из Google.
a solution developed by
Open source аналог их.
people who used to work in Google.
И оно очень активно поддерживается. Даже сейчас есть
And it's actively supported. There's an enterprise version with broader feature set. Out of the box, it has a client and it has wider features than Teleport. And there are enterprise solutions that are provided together with cloud products. And you might have used them and not even thought that these are IAP. Azure have their own implementation. Cloudflare, their zero trust solution, is essentially an IAP under the hood.
У Google, в Google Cloud
Google Cloud
точно так же Identity over Proxy, они даже его рекламируют как отдельный продукт.
has exactly that name, Identity over Proxy. They just
Что сделаем мы?
market it as a separate product. And here's what we do. Here's what we did. We piloted Pomerium, and we liked them. It's written in Go. It's a modern language, and it's actively developed and actively
Сделать свое решение.
supported. But we made a decision to develop our own solution based on Jinx and Jinx.
Стандартно для балансировки.
Because in our company, Nginx is the standard solution for
Реализует логику
proxy. We developed a module that implements the identity over proxy logic using two publicly available modules, OIDC SSO and Auth JWT,
GVT токены в виде
which
сессионных хук.
helps use JWT tokens as session cookies.
Уже решение, как вам.
And it is up to you to decide which implementation to use. We made this decision, again, because we have quite a large expertise of writing modules and fine-tuning Nginx to our high-load
Просто на пальцах опять еще раз про риски. Да, у нас
environment. A few words about risks. We have VPN and IAP. VPN grants access to network, and thus there's a possibility to break out of the sandbox, and there's an opportunity to attack network protocols and do traffic monitoring. With IAP, this
на VPN, конечно же, это опять
addresses all of that. And in terms of
доступ к конкретному одному
employee compromise, with VPN, it grants you access to the full network. In IAP, it only grants you access to a particular application.
похожей истории. И в Identity over Proxy еще появляется возможное... Не то, что появляется.
In IAP, additionally,
Нужно аудировать, который ты
you
каким-либо образом. На самом деле...
have the understanding that you've got to audit the web apps that you open access to. In VPN, it still exists.
На котором живет набор веб-сервисов внутренних, которые тоже могут быть уязвимыми. И мы трансформировали таким образом риск
And thus we were able to
угоном кук через всякие стили.
transform the risk of stealing session cookies. That is the biggest IAP risk, and in fact, that is the biggest risk of using SSO.
Более явным сделали риск на SSO. То есть как можно от него защититься?
So we essentially ended up with higher SSO risk exposure. What can we do to address that? You can
Приложения будут выдавать
configure settings in such a way
фиксированным скопом, таким
so
образом, например,
that
если сотрудник, которому нужно получить
if an employee wants to get access to Jira, they get access to Jira, they have certified, but if they try to go to Confluence, you can configure settings in such a way that they will be asked for all authentication factors or parts of authentication factors. And that addresses the risk that one cookie would work for all apps. A recommendation for SSO is to reduce the lifetime of access tokens, to use single-use refresh tokens, and to implement monitoring of anomalous user entries, and to implement more access policies, including context-based. Talking about the vulnerability of apps, well, it's quite manageable. If you have an application security team, if you implement DevSecOps, if you implement WAF, if you have centralized logging, then you can mitigate these risks. And before you roll out to prod, I would recommend to carry out additional SSO audits, to do IDM, IAM audits, to do IAP audits, and to do your web apps audits. Implementation. This is an open question, but it ends up with a very straightforward task. You have two groups of users, or rather two types of access organization, VPN only or IAP only, and the task is to migrate most users to IAP, leaving as few users as possible in VPN. So we don't discontinue VPN altogether. VPN is good, and there are many good solutions, and there are scenarios where we need VPN. And you can address it from various angles, depending on what risk you're trying to address. Say, if you don't like your outstaffers, and you can proceed from them. You can say, okay, who are the non-trusted outstaffers? What access do they have? And let's do a mapping of that access. Then you migrate the systems with which those people work to IAP, and then you can take VPN access away from them. Or vice versa. If you're not so much concerned about outstaffers, you can do an audit of the key systems, the most popular systems that are used by the majority of your employees. Then you migrate them to IAP, and then you do an audit and establish the categories of employees that only require access to key systems to perform their duties. And thereafter, you take away the VPN access without any problems. And in fact, the users would be happy because the user experience would be different. You just type in the domain and login and password, and you're in. General recommendations. If you want to move in that direction, if you like the implementation and the approach, then you want to understand that IAP uses HTTP, so you want to walk away from thick clients to HTTP, to web apps. You want to do an InfoSec and IT stock taking of web apps that would be easier to migrate to IAP.
свой CDN,
without any issues.
и вам придется это все в моменте переделать.
To avoid a situation when a service uses their own CDN for some reason and you would have to do something about it. And also, quite obviously, but it is necessary to do an audit by internal or both internal and external resources of your internal web apps. That would help you to later quickly switch to IAP.
Упрощать аудиты в том числе.
And finally, DevSecOps,
Хотел сказать еще несколько
which helps make audit easier. Finally, in conclusion, a few ideas of what can be done. If you have an SSO and if you don't have a web authn on it, which is a more modern protocol, I suggest that you support it to add more authentication factors for your SSO. And the web authn will help you implement your device identity. Most modern browsers support WebAuthn Sign API and can generate a unique device fingerprint. So that can help you build a registry of corporate devices and manage access through device identity. Say you have a user that should have access to GitHub and, God forbid, production from their corporate PC, but not from their personal PC, in which case they will only be able to access their email. Moving towards checking all the three components that operate in IAP. You can start with just user identity, then proceed to device identity, and then to context. And I suggest that at some point in time you use all three. To expand the context capabilities, if in your company there's a team who's responsible for anti-fraud, anti-bot, they have most certainly quite a lot of experience in JavaScript fingerprinting. That could add more content to each of your requests. And ultimately, you could end up by replacing all your proxies with IAP, because essentially it fulfills all the functions of proxy, but it also has some more. And then you would be able to move faster to your zero trust future when you would roll out those IAPs when you are ready. And the VPN is there to stay. Even Google, with their zero trust implementation, they have use cases for VPN. We need to continue segmenting our network and hardening our VPNs. And that's the end of my presentation. Here you can see some links. Links to Pomerium, and when you get the slides later, they will be clickable. I recommend this book on Zero Trust. Recently, a second edition was published, much expanded, and Google has their own resource on Beyond Corp, where they publish some white papers. They are quite high level, but still quite useful. And that's it from me. Thank you. I can now answer questions. There's a QR code at the end.
Хорошо. Какие ключевые отличия и преимущества IAP перед PAM?
What key differences of IAP over PAM? Good question. These are different classes of solutions. They are similar in essence, but PAM, it's a little bit different. IAP, it's essentially a proxy. It's Nginx on steroids that you can use for the internet. PAM is a broader class of solutions. Next question: is there a mechanism that helps understand that the user has been compromised? A mechanism. Let me think. Yes. Context, I mentioned that. You can use information such as time zones.
там страны, например, и
or countries from which the user operates, and the
список устройств сотрудника, с которых он должен работать.
list of devices that a user can legitimately work from. If you can see that the user logs on from new devices, there's a question of whether to grant access or to raise an alert at least.
Еще один от Юрия.
Next question from Yuri. How IAP distinguishes between types of devices, because it's accessed from a browser and the fingerprints can be supplemented. Yes, you can try and supplement fingerprints,
В том же Pomerium, например,
but
есть
in Pomerium, for example,
который
there's a
может
desktop
делать
client
на уровне системы, добавлять контекста и
that can add context on a system level
прям нативно из
and
системы
to provide information on a device natively from the system to IP upon request.
какие-то проблемы с
Have there been any issues in the switching from VPN to IAP? Say, there were concerns with lack of access, and how you address that? Well, we didn't, because we
работы нужен минимальный набор систем.
started from the employees who only needed a minimum amount of systems to work. And in fact, the customers were more happy because they didn't need to launch any clients, they didn't need to update anything. The only thing they did was to use their credentials, and that's it. And what's less expensive? Is it VPN or IAP? Well, it depends on what you have at the moment.
Сложно отвечать в вакууме, в общем.
It's difficult to provide a generalized question. If you have a VPN already, and if you have Palo Alto that can do inspections, then yes, perhaps you would be better off with VPN. But if you have expertise in development, or if you can implement a radio solution from zero, so implementing from zero for IAP would be different. What is the difference of IAP and the role-based model?
Ну, собственно, отличие опять же в том, что доступ
The difference is that with IAP there's access to the internet. Whatever role-based model you use, it would operate on L3, L4 level, IP addresses and ports. At least most role-based models.
и гранулярность выше, соответственно. Вы вообще
And so that's a higher level, and the granularity is higher.
можете иметь доступ туда и
You can write controls you can write rules for every control.
VPN всегда является менее защищенным.
Is VPN always less secure? No.
Того риска,
That depends on the risk that you want to mitigate. At the beginning, I discussed the approaches. A VPN is less protected, not because it has more loopholes, but because it provides broader access because of the level of abstraction at which it operates. It operates at L3 and L4.
сущностями на L3, L4,
So it operates entities on L3 and L4, and it cannot provide the level of granularity that a proxy can provide.